Grace and peace to all of you resonating lights, you echoes throughout eternity of the Sacred One. Welcome to Sunday morning service here at New Testament Church of the Firstborn. Welcome to the Gathering Echo, aptly named because that is the purpose of meeting and being here and sharing the truth and the knowledge and the love of God, is to gather His echoes, all of us together, for the purpose of reaching the four corners of the world. We're going to continue today a discussion we began on Wednesday night about our purpose. And our purpose in design from the Father, from the Creator of all things, was to be warriors tending a garden, or gardens, as it may be. We talked about the Enuma Elish in the Mythos. If you miss Wednesday night service, it will give you a lot of great foundation into what we're going into today and the things that we're going to talk about today. But because things ended on a note where we got a great example of Gideon in this concept of a warrior in a garden who wins a battle with a lantern and a trumpet. Just 300 men. We juxtapose that with the Spartan battle of the Battle of Thermopylae, or the Hot Gates, where 300 men were able to dwindle down some of the Persian forces, but it ended in a loss. But when God is in it, you don't need the armaments, the tools of man, because the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. Because we're not being sent into war, we're being sent into adventure. And the adventure is finding God in you, in you, in you, and in you, and coming together to be fitly framed together, to be joined together, to be woven together in the tapestry as His beloved city. Because a city is devised of homes, residences, and we are the houses, we are the temples of God. So when we meet each other on this adventure and we gather together, we become the city of God. And as many cities as we put together, we begin to take over the population of this world until we are truly governed and reigned under a theocracy, under the rule of God, and we institute His kingdom in the kingdoms of this world. And as we went through the conversation and we talked about some of these issues and difficulties, we talked about the divine enchanter and his divine enchantment, his whisper in the garden that wakes us up to our divine potential, wakes us up to realizing we are more than just animals in the animal kingdom. We are something else entirely. And we're purposed for something else entirely. We're not purposed to be gardeners in the garden. We're purposed to be warriors. But as warriors, we learn war. It's something that is taught to us. Because when we become aware of what's good and what's evil, we are acutely aware immediately of what can hurt us. Now that information is twofold. You want to protect yourself from what can hurt you, but now you also have the information to know what can hurt someone else. That's the beginning of strife. Strife turns into wrath or hate, turns into wrath. Wrath turns into violence. Violence turns into war. These things are learned and taught over time. We even have books and manuals, The Art of War. We teach ourselves these things. And God understood that we would need to learn and procure these skills, these abilities, and these tools to learn that we never needed them in the first place. It's an adventure to discover who you are. And along the way, you're going to think you're someone else. And then you might change, and now you've become something else. And then you might change again, and you've become something else. And this is working out your salvation. Because you should continually be changing. The moment you stop learning who you are is the moment your faith stops working. It has no legs left on it. You've stopped. You've reached a certain point. That's where your faith ends. It comes to a point where, I can't go beyond that. Or, I don't want to go beyond that. This is good enough for me. The question is not what's good enough for you. It's what did God intend you to be? Amen. And how great can you be? Will you be the mighty man of valor, the mighty woman of valor, even if everything in your body says, yeah, that can't be me. Everything in my body said, this wouldn't be me. But here I am. Because once you have that alignment with the sacred, once these things are confirmed in your spirit, in your soul, once you have those men or women of God or God Himself that speaks to you and speaks into your life a thing that you never thought was possible, suddenly your faith gets a little boost. Well, maybe this is who I am. Maybe this isn't just who I am. Maybe this is the beginning of learning more about who I am. And that's the process that we're trying to take each and every one of you through and each and every one of you through, is working this process out until you get to the place where you are comfortable in your own skin, where when God comes to visit you, you don't feel like you need to cover anything up or hide anything. I can stand there open and transparent in my nakedness, unashamed, because I know the voice of my Creator. I know the voice of truth. I'm hearing intelligently, and He is ordering my steps. So I walk with Him through the cool of the day. And we've come to a place as humanity to get there from where Adam and Eve were. Look at the amount of change. What they were unwilling to do, what they were afraid to do, all of us are begging for the opportunity to do. And here today, we just got to experience it. God spoke through His prophet to one of us. It was confirmed by another in a dream that they had, without conversation, without orchestration, without putting it together, without piecing it together, without writing notes, without sending emails or leaving memos. God just walked in the cool of our day, and we heard intelligently what He had to say, and we were not afraid. Instead, we should be joyful. Which is why I said we can do better than that when we clap for Him. Look at where we are and where we came from. So we talked about their eyes being open to their divine potential for good and evil, and the inner mutiny that begins to take place, this knowledge that I know what hurts me, so I know how to hurt someone else. And when I know how to hurt someone else, then I know how to get over on someone else. I know how to step on someone to get to the next level up. See, I believe humanity sees an opportunity to seize the power inherent in this potential, and divinity sees an opportunity to serve with competency. The part of you that identifies with the material world is protecting its vulnerabilities, what it's afraid of, and it's fashioning and adorning armor to try to cover it up and blend in, protect itself. This inner mutiny must be contended with voluntarily, which ushers in struggle and suffering. Because we're designed to stand out from the rest of creation. We're designed to be set apart. We're in this world, but we are not of this world. This demands reliance on your Creator, reliance on the sacred, reliance on God. It demands that you pay attention, you listen and hear intelligently the sacred's whisper. It's a meditation that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable and pleasing in His sight. Because He's ready to talk to you. And He wants you to listen. And not just wait for your turn to speak. So often in society, so often in relationships, the number one complaint is communication. Well, I don't feel like you're hearing me. Well, I've been sitting here listening to you for 20 minutes. Well, what did I say? Well, a bunch of stuff. Well, that doesn't help. We're no closer to a resolution. Yeah, but this is what I've got to say about the matter. Well, what do you think about what I had to say? Well, I was too mad that you didn't listen to what I had to say. I didn't really listen to what you had to say. And around and around and around we go. And sometimes it's not an argument you're in. Sometimes it's just sharing your life. Sometimes it's sharing a thought. and you have a conversation, and then the person that you're talking to jumps in, and they're on Saturn, orbiting one of the rings, on another planet, on another thought, on another wavelength. It's like, did you hear anything that I just said? What are you talking about? Where did that come from? And then my favorite part is, oh, well, I was just thinking something else. Start all over. No, thank you. No, thank you. That's where my phlegmatic kicks in and says, nope, I did this once. I went through it thoroughly. I was clear. I'm done. We'll just figure it out from here, I think. A little insight into life at home, behind closed doors. My wife will love that. So why is this whisper important? Why is this idea of meditating and listening intelligently important? Is because a whisper draws you close. When you call over to one of your friends, like, hey, I got to tell you something. Come in close. I got to tell you something. You cover it so nobody can see it. But even though you're covering it and you're talking in a lowered voice, the person that you're talking to will lean in real close. Oh, okay, that's what we're doing. All right, okay. That's what God wants to do with you. That's how close He is to you. See, He'll never leave you. He'll never forsake you. He'll be with you all the way into the end of the age. Even if you make your bed in hell, behold, you're with me. He's there. But we don't consider how closely He's there. It's as close, or closer, I would argue, than your own shadow. And He's ready to talk to you. He's got this esoteric knowledge, this information, what the Gnostics were always after. It's the secret information. And He wants to share those secrets with you. Not for you to keep to yourself, but because you're His voice in the earth. If He can whisper the secret to you, you can be His mouthpiece to shout it from the rooftops, to say it from the pulpit, to say it from the stage, to say it in the gym or your workplace or the park. It gives you the opportunity to act and live and be as Jesus was in the package that God designed. You. He had Jesus. He loved Jesus. Jesus completed His mission. Now it's your turn. And it's been our turn for 2,000 years. Let's keep going. This whisper equips you for your next steps towards your intended purpose. See, before this eye-opening moment, Adam and Eve were merely gardeners, now faced with the war of their lives. But this war is really an adventure. It's dangerous and terrifying at times, and absolute ecstasy and bliss at others. This is what we are purposed to go into. This is part of our divine design. It is better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. Contending with the proclivities born within you in your darkness and humanity requires you to be a warrior. You're going to have to fight the things inside of you that don't want the will of God, that wants to live as an animal being. It's not who you are. That's where the war is, within yourself. Not without. Everything without is the adventure to discover who you are, to equip yourself to fight the war within. And we need to stop fighting wars with each other. And the church needs to stop going to war with God's people. Very good. We're not in the position to exclude or condemn anyone. If Jesus didn't come to condemn the world, how can we stand in a position following Him and do that to others? I don't care what your vice is. I don't care what your downfall is. I don't care what your thoughts or your opinions are. You are a child of God, and if I saw you in your true form, no matter where you are in your life, no matter what you've done in your life, it would be hard for me not to fall on my knees and worship a divine creature such as you. Each and every one of us. There's no differentiation between what someone has done, what someone has did, or what someone's involved in. They're in the process of working out their salvation just like you. And they need a place and an opportunity to do it. More importantly, they need people around them to help them through it. Because on this adventure, you'll find you're not alone. All of us are on it. All of us have to make this trek. The mountains and the paths might be different, but we're all tied to the same purpose. And we're all tied to this same design. And it's about time the church starts acting like it, regardless of what your opinions or feelings are on what they do or who they say they are. The lost are lost, regardless of where they're lost, or what neighborhood they wound up in, or what house or activity they wound up involved in. And they need Jesus just as much as we do. You must be trained to mastery in these weapons of warfare and contend with the darkness within to have dominion without. To this point, Marcus Aurelius would say this: a man's worth is no greater than his ambitions. Nothing happens to any man that he is not formed by nature or the divine to bear. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. What do you think about yourself? How do you view yourself as a child of God? That's a question you should be asking. When you get to the end of that answer, then I want you to ask the more important question. What does God think about you? And if you don't know that answer, I think you need a conversation. I think you need to meditate and listen for His whisper. 2 Corinthians 10:4, I've quoted it, for the weapons of our warfare are not of the material world, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We talked about the armaments that Adam and Eve put on. They were fashioned by gardeners, of no utility, no use. Immediately God has to rectify this with a sacrifice. So what do they see in the beginning of all things? Death is involved in this journey. Violence is involved in this journey. But we've been given a task. We now see that we're purposed for more than living inside this walled garden. We haven't expanded it. We haven't gone anywhere with it. And in time, it will all be depleted and wasted away. We're being sent out. We're seeing these things because we're going to have to go and find our own food. We're going to have to make clothes for ourselves. We're going to have to protect ourselves because we're going to be more vulnerable out in the deserts and the desolate places on this adventure. We're going to have to learn to go to war with these animals and beasts and these difficulties of working the ground and surviving labor to bring forth life. All for what purpose? To cultivate. Not to be at war, but to bring about life, growth, and progress. Like Marduk from the Enuma Elish, he had mastered and put on all of his armaments. He was adorned as a competent warrior, and the dragon of chaos would become afraid. That is what the whisper in the garden was awakening us to realize and actuate in ourselves. So chaos would be put on notice that we are coming and prepared to extract habitable order, to abide, to live, to stay in complete alignment, in competence with the sacred. Why? Because that makes us different than all the rest of the animal kingdom. That's what sets us apart. Inner mutiny presents strongholds our physical bodies cannot adequately contend with. And that reveals the reality and existence of God and our need for the sacred to help us overcome. You can't do it alone. You can't do it alone because we're only a piece of what He is. We have to align ourselves with the bigger portion. Align ourselves with the bigger portion, which is all of us. Look how much God is represented in this building today. And how much of it is out there that should be in here. Because they don't feel rejection. They don't feel condemnation. They don't feel judgment. They feel love. They feel acceptance. And maybe for the first time in their life, they're actually getting to hear those things and understand truth. That's an important part, because the strength of a person's spirit would then be measured by how much truth they could tolerate, or more precisely, to what extent they need to have it diluted, disguised, sweetened, muted, or falsified. What does that statement really mean? The status quo is weak in spirit. Truth is not always fun. It's not always good. It's not always joyful. Sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's disgusting. Our job is to accept and tolerate those truths, and like the example of our bishop's wife, make the simple calculation. Even though it's hard, even though it's difficult, even though it's disgusting, the calculation is joy. There's a reason I'm being faced with these things. Instead of why me, you should ask God, what do you need me to do with this? Why have you given me this? Meaning, what's my purpose with this? You've handed me this. You've dealt me this hand. I'm going to play it. So you either need to teach me how to bluff or tell me when to fold. Because we ain't winning with these cards, I can tell you that. Right? This is a relatable truth. This is something that we all go through in our daily lives. How much truth can we tolerate? Because sometimes we hear things that's like, oh, I don't need to hear all that. But that person is telling you because they need to get that off of their chest. They need to get that off of their heart. And God would listen. Which means you should listen. And maybe while you're listening, and not waiting for your turn to speak, but just listening, and open the door to that person to tell you what they need, another whisper will come in. Maybe God will give you the word that person needs to get through what they're struggling with. Every conversation is an opportunity to be God to someone. Every interaction is an opportunity to be God to someone. We don't live and we don't act and we don't behave like that all the time, because the inner mutiny is we live in a human body that has its own set of proclivities. We have our own darkness to contend with and deal with. And sometimes it's a lot, especially if you're me. I'm going to get through today. I just got to get through today. I'm a mess today. Chaos, you win today. Have at it again tomorrow. Over and over and over and over, this cycle repeats. Because that's the adventure of our lives. See, we're not of this world. We came from another world. We came into this world. We go back to another world. This is a time and season. It's not a beginning or an end. It's a moment. And in that moment are a series of moments. And those moments are opportunities to be God to someone. Because you are. Not because you can be, but because you are. Identify yourself correctly. You are a God. The material world identifications don't matter. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter who I'm talking to, what gender they are, what color they are, how they align their personal beliefs, politics, or sexual proclivities. I'm talking to a God. They deserve my respect like I talk to Him. It's that respect, it's that camaraderie, it's that understanding that I see you and not just the physical facade, not the look on your face, not the brand of makeup you wear or the style of clothes that you adorn your body with. I'm not seeing that. That's not who I'm talking to. I'm talking to you. And I'm excited too, because I know your earth name, but I haven't got to know the other one yet. And I'd love to get to know that one. I'd love to get to know my own. And those that have gone on. What our Creator calls them. What they've been called for all time. What they'll be called for all time. Maybe we got it right sometimes. We don't know yet. It's kind of exciting to adventure out and find out, though, isn't it? It's joy, folks. Stoicism. We've talked about it a little bit. I wanted to do this because I kind of glossed over some things. Also had a few errors and omissions because I got a little mush-mouthed and tongue-tied on Wednesday, so I'm going to correct some of those things. But Stoicism was named after the Stoa Pokal, which is a painted colonnade, and it features the Battle of Marathon within it. Zeno of Citium was the founder of Stoicism, and they named it after the building because a Stoic would never name anything after themselves. It's not what Stoicism is. There are 4 cardinal virtues to Stoicism, and this is what really got my attention when I was reading through the Stoics' writings, listening to Ryan Holiday and reading Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. And I'll give them to you in the original Greek because this is how all Stoics wrote. Prudentia, temperantia, fortitudo, and justitia. Now those 4 words mean wisdom, temperance, courage, and justice. Those are the 4 cardinal virtues of Stoicism. So to call yourself a good Stoic, you had to have those 4 things pretty well nailed down. In the story of Marcus Aurelius and his son Commodus that the movie Gladiator portrays, those are the 4 cardinal virtues that Commodus did not possess. Now, in history, Marcus Aurelius wrote to his son about these virtues. He set up advisors, teachers, administrators to teach Commodus these things so that Commodus would become a moral man. But he rejected all of his father's attempts. He rejected all of the virtues that his father chose as cardinal virtues, even though his father didn't choose them. He's following in a belief system. He's following a moral code, essentially. And eventually, when he does become emperor, he kills all of the advisors and consuls and administrators that his father set up for him because he wasn't going to listen to his dad after all. It's tough. But Marcus Aurelius is writing these meditations that I've read, some that I've read to you, a few more that I'll read to you before we're finished, in about mid-150s, 160s AD. So this is right in the climax of the church forming through the 1st to the 4th centuries. He's right there at the beginning, right there after the 1st century, and he's writing his meditations, and it would have done the church some good to pay attention to what he was doing. But of course, men were at war. Rome was conquering and enslaving other men. And the Hebrews, the Jewish people, were in opposition to that and had issues with that. And there were battles and wars fought, and we can get into the history some other time. But this is what I mean when I say we go through the mythos. We go through different belief systems and moral codes and understandings because these men and women found God in some way, shape, or form. And that is worth going in and extracting that out and embedding that into our experience. Because that's knowledge, that's truth, that's life from God given to someone else, even if they called their belief system something else. Or if they spoke in a language that was more akin to the personification of gods, like the Greek gods or the Roman gods and the Pantheon and Mount Olympus, things of that nature. But Marcus Aurelius was unflinchingly honest with himself because Meditations is a self-reflection. He says in the book, be careful not to be Caesarified. Be careful not to be dyed or stained purple. Remember the statement I read to you earlier was that you'd be dyed with the color of your thoughts, and your world becomes what you think. What he's saying here is this power, this status, this wealth, these mechanisms of control that I have, they'll change me if I'm not careful. I'll become something, but not who I really am. I'll become something else that I'm really not. That awareness comes only from one place, and that's God. That's the awakening that goes back to the beginning of time. That you're more than just your human being self. And you have to take care of this human being self because it can become something that is totally not you and defile you and corrupt you. And this Stoic, this Roman Caesar, is aware of this and writing this. Not for us, of course. Like I said on Wednesday night, he would probably be mortified to know that his personal journal that he wrote to himself in another language is now being read by me on a TV screen somewhere in somebody's house. He also worked proactively to avoid it, which is what we do in Christianity. We proactively work out our salvation with that fear and trembling to avoid becoming the tyrant, to avoid becoming the next Herod or the next Pharisee or Sadducee. Unfortunately, not enough work in the church has been done to avoid the two latter that I brought up. There's a lot of Pharisees and Sadducees in the world of Christianity today. And not just Christianity. Please, let me take my criticism worldwide. In all religions, there are tyrants. There are people that dominate God's people with rules and regulations that weren't intended by God to be used to rule, intimidate, and put you in your place. Your place is with God. Your place is as a God. Your place is stand up and be. And then you'll see we all stand shoulder to shoulder. Nobody's ahead of anybody else. It's not the idea. And if you are ahead of anybody else, get to the back of the line. Not because we're telling you to, but because the moment you realize, oh, I've stepped out in front of here, I need to go back to serving. I've become too heady and high-minded. That was as much a statement of guidance to let you know, if you start getting out in front of the pack too far, you need to humble yourself and get to the back. You need to humble yourself and start washing feet again. You need to get back to the place of servanthood because you've gotten too far out in front of the people. And out there, you're all by yourself. You're only a piece of God after all. It'd be better to stay with the rest of God. It'd be better to walk shoulder to shoulder with God. In the Spartan warfare, we talked about the Battle of Thermopylae. They used the phalanx, which is where they all stood shoulder to shoulder and they lined their shields up. And they would come up from behind and they would hold their shields and they could form an entire sphere of protection around each other. That's what God has designed for us. The fiery darts of the enemy can't get through that protection because you're more God with the rest of the gods around you than you are by yourself. Yes. Too many ministers, too many preachers get in the position where they think it's all them. I can withstand the fiery darts of the devil. From all sides? Good luck with that. You don't have any gaps or chinks in your armor? If you don't, and you say you don't, we're going to find out. Because the willfully blind always see consequence. You go back to Horus and Osiris. That king was willfully blind to his brother's intent to murder him. And because of that willful blindness, because he thought he was untouchable, he got touched. And he got taken out. It was only his son that could rectify the wrong. It was only his son who had the vision to see what he needed to see. So that's the important part of the gathering echo. That's why we named this that movement. Because together with all of our shields, all the fiery darts of the enemy are quenched. We can protect each other because we represent more of God. We are Gideon and the 300 with our lanterns and our trumpets, and the sword of God goes before us. You don't need a physical sword. Even though you can use them, even though you have the army, even though you have the men, you have the power. Do you have the competence to allow God to do for you what you couldn't do for yourself? That's what made Gideon a mighty man of valor. God went before him. It's these statements by Marcus Aurelius that seemingly make the unrelatable man universally relatable to every human being on the planet. He's speaking to potential, and regardless of the language or translation, it's a divine concept that we all can relate to without much effort. And here's where I wanted to get some of these corrections in. So Marcus's father was not emperor. I think I made that clear. The Roman tradition was to adopt a son when you didn't have one. Emperor Hadrian, I got that name wrong. I threw a name out on Wednesday. It was so bad. It was so bad. My brain just did not work in that moment. Emperor Hadrian was old, and he was sonless. And he is the one who saw young Marcus Aurelius, and he saw something in him. He saw the young man's potential, the young child's potential to be something great. To not be just a boy, but to be a potential emperor. Imagine the insight that you have to have as a man to look at a child and say, you could be the next emperor of Rome. It's a good start to the story. Now, Marcus, it helped Marcus. His nickname was Verissimus, which means the truthful one. He was too young to be named emperor, so the emperor at the time, Hadrian, elects Antoninus Pius, his last name is Pius, to be emperor on the condition that he would adopt Marcus. So Antoninus Pius adopts Marcus, and the thinking behind Emperor Hadrian was Antoninus will probably rule or serve for about 5 years. Marcus will step in, and everything will be good to go. But like we talked about on Wednesday, Antoninus Pius lived about 19 more years, ruled about 19 more years, which gave Marcus Aurelius a 20-year apprenticeship to become Caesar. So the truthful one gets to meditate, listen, pay attention, and hear intelligently another emperor rule for 20 years knowing he's the next in line. He's going to prepare. He's going to be ready. He's going to be competent when the time comes. Not because he had the power. The power was yet to come. What he was being taught was everything he needed to be competent with power. Big difference. Now, Faustina, who was Antoninus' daughter, married Marcus Aurelius. So, technically, Antoninus adopted Marcus, and he married his adopted sister. They're not related, so, it's a mess. This is Roman times. Cut them some slack. And the tragedy of their marriage was that they lost 7 children. They all died before reaching the age of adulthood. Now, in those times, it's important to note, and I left this part out on Wednesday, if you lived past 20, it was likely you would live to 80. It's just how things worked back then. But most people didn't make it to 20 or 30 years old. So the thinking was you had 20 to 30 years, and there were a couple of old folks around that made it, that survived, that had the antibodies or whatever it was at the time, didn't drink the water when everybody else did, and they happened to live. So life expectancy went way up if you lived past 20, but they're sword fighting, they're cutting each other up, it's a violent, brutal time in history, so not a lot of people live, but this is, not a lot of children lived in childbirth either. We didn't have any of the technology we have today, antiseptics, cleaning supplies, materials. If you cut your finger in those days, if it got infected, you were likely to die. Diarrhea wasn't a commercial, it was a death sentence. That's serious. It's called dysentery. Read a history book. Took a lot of people out. So it's a brutal time, but they still had to endure this man who was going to be emperor, who had this apprenticeship, and all of these things worked out for him. The truthful one, I'm sure he had questions to God as to why not just one of my heirs, just one of my children make it. But he gives no thought to that. He suffers through it. He's there for his wife. He's grieving. Rumors come up that she's been unfaithful. He completely disregards it. He takes care of her. He allows her to suffer the loss, and he bears the load. It's an incredible thing to do, to not be completely broken and shattered. Your partner is, and all you can be is whole for them. Because the consequences of the material world to a Stoic are irrelevant. There's a bigger plan. I'm suffering this, I'm enduring this for a reason. The calculation is joy, because I get to do something with this. So, Marcus, having no heirs to name as his successor, he also inherited a stepbrother in the process. Now, in those times, it was just as likely if you had a rival or a brother or someone that could be up for the throne, an assassination attempt was coming. So what did Marcus do? Wise Marcus, the truthful one, he appoints Lucius Verus as co-emperor because all his sons has died. And this avoids any assassination attempt on Marcus's life. So it's Marcus, co-emperor with Lucius Verus, which co-emperors were a big thing in those times because it was a check and balance on power. Like Marcus said, there was a real danger in being Caesarified. And then Commodus doesn't actually kill Marcus. I think I made that pretty clear. He died from the plague. He actually sent Commodus away so that Commodus wouldn't catch the plague. And unlike the movie, He doesn't try to give it to a general in his army. Maximus was a fictitious character. He does name Commodus as his successor in the end, knowing Commodus wasn't a moral man. So that's the truth behind the story. And then on Wednesday, we read this excerpt. And it's right after the victory of the Germanic tribes. Marcus Aurelius is dying from the plague. And he's thinking about naming a successor, naming Commodus. And this is where Ridley Scott goes a little bit off script from the history. But I'm thankful that he did, because I want to reread this conversation, because it makes the point about what I'm saying. And it makes the point in multiple ways. It ties in the whisper, the understanding, the meditation. It ties in Gideon's unwillingness to take on and assume more power from his position as a mighty man of valor. See, to him, to Gideon, being a mighty man of valor, that was all he needed. I'm God's man. God's sword goes before me. I have no need of being a king. But maybe he should have been one. Because maybe, like in the movie, there's something that people rightly saw in him. There's a potential in him that was rightly seen. If you have the attitude that you don't need all of the pomp and circumstance and the power behind being a king, you might be the right guy for the job. So let's read this. Maximus begins the conversation. He's called by Caesar. He walks into Caesar's tent. Says, "You sent for me, Caesar." Marcus doesn't respond. Maximus turns to look at the weakened and older, plague-ridden Marcus Aurelius, and he says, "Caesar?" And Caesar says, "Tell me again, Maximus, why are we here?" Maximus says, "For the glory of the empire, sire." Marcus says, yes, I remember. You see that map, Maximus, and it's a map of their conquests. It's the map of the Roman Empire and their expansion under his rule. He said, "That is the world which I created. For 25 years I have conquered, spilt blood, expanded the empire. Since I became Caesar, I have known 4 years without war, 4 years of peace in 20. And for what? I brought the sword and nothing more." Here's a man who's been a warrior, and he's scared to death. He's cultivated nothing but death. He's only been a warrior. He wants to be more than that. He wants to be more than a warrior. He wants to have left a legacy. He wants to have cultivated a future, progress, growth. At the end of his life, he's looking back on it and he's seeing maybe 4 years of that. Maybe 4 out of 20. It's disappointing for him. Why is it disappointing for him? Because as a man, he's achieved and he's accomplished much. He's expanded the empire. He's conquered. He's ruled. He's had dominion. But Marcus Aurelius knows he's something more than that. He's not just a man. His purpose was bigger than what men can do. And there's a knowledge there. And Maximus says, "Why are we here?" "For the glory of the empire, sire." Yes, I remember. This is the map. He says, Maximus says, "Caesar, your life." And Marcus interrupts him and says, please, don't call me Caesar. Don't call me that. I relate to that a lot. Come here and sit. Let us talk now. Together now. Very simply as men. Well, Maximus, talk. And Maximus opens up here because he understands Marcus is listening intelligently. He's hearing intelligently. He's not waiting for his turn to speak. He wants to hear what he has to say. He says, 5,000 of my men are out in the freezing mud. 3,000 are cleaved and bloodied. 2,000 will never leave this place. And I will not believe that they fought and died for nothing. That's the type of general you want. Right. He's not worried about winning the battle as much as he is keeping the people. Protecting his men. And believing that their lives weren't lost for nothing. It's important. You're seeing insights here. And Marcus says, and what would you believe? Maximus says, they fought for you and for Rome. But he says they fought for you. You're our leader. You're who we look to. You're the man we all want to follow. It's a great man. And Marcus says, and what is Rome? Maximus? Maximus says, I've seen much of the rest of the world. It is brutal and cruel and dark. Rome is the light. Marcus knows he's never been to Rome. He says, yet you've never been there. You've not seen what it has become. I am dying, Maximus. And when a man sees his end, he wants to know that there's been some purpose to his life. How will the world speak my name in years to come? Will I be known as the philosopher? He is to me. The warrior? It's how history books remember him. Or the tyrant? It's how his son will be remembered. Or will I be remembered as the emperor who gave Rome back to herself? Who gave the city back to its people? There was once a dream that was Rome, but you could only whisper it. Anything more than a whisper, and it would vanish. It was so fragile, and I fear that it will not survive the winter. So Maximus, let us whisper now, together, you and I. And this is where it gets me. As soon as he asks him to whisper, to draw close, what does he want to talk about? He says, you have a son. Maximus nods. Is this an odd thing for a soldier and an emperor to be talking about their family? While they're out in war, while they're conquesting, while they're winning, while they're victorious. This is a celebratory time. This is celebration of the great victory of the Germanic tribes and expansion of the empire. And here's an emperor sloughing off his emperor's title and personage and asking his general to sit and whisper with him about his family, about his legacy, what he has done with his life. He says, tell me about your home. Now, Maximus in the movie, shocked, totally floored by this request. But you see in him the same thing you see in every grandparent when their grandchild walks through the door. Their face lights up, their eyes get bigger, the smiles come out, and here's the love and the hugs. And, you know, they don't care that you're there so much. I mean, they love you and all. But the grandbabies are here. The little ones. Get to love on them and then send them home. Feed them all the sugar and give them all the loud toys and send them home. Right? So he lights up. And Maximus says, my house is in the hills above Trujillo. A very simple place. Pink stones that warm in the sun. Kitchen garden that smells of herbs in the day and jasmine in the evening. Through the gate is a giant poplar. Figs, apples, pears. The soil, Marcus, black. Black like my wife's hair. Grapes on the southern slopes, olives on the north. Wild ponies play near my house. They tease my son. He wants to be one of them. Almost every morning when I wake my son up, or he wakes me up rather, to come get him out of his crib, he'll tell me he's a puppy. He wants to be like the D-dog that's downstairs. In that moment, what you see in this snapshot is this is a real conversation between two men. And all the facade is stripped away. This is an intimate, close, personal conversation. The same intimate, close, personal conversation God wants to whisper to you. He wants to ask you about your children. He wants to ask you about your home. He wants to ask you about the things that you've cultivated in this life with your hands, with your heart, with your mind, with your soul. He wants to open that dialogue with you. See who you really are. Because a request is coming. Sacrifice is coming. Like we've talked about before, the flood is coming. It is inevitable. Will you be paying attention when he whispers to you the blueprints on how to build the boat to survive it? Maximus, or Marcus says, Maximus, when was the last time you were home? He replies very quickly. He's made the calculation. 2 years, 264 days, and this morning. Marcus says, I envy you, Maximus. It's a good home. Worth fighting for? Maximus nods yes. Then Marcus rises, comes out of that conversation, and he becomes Caesar again because he knows when and where to use it. it makes him a meek man. It makes him a competent warrior. And what he's cultivating is the garden of Maximus's heart. To do a thing he never thought he would do. To be in a position he never thought he would be in. And to accept something he always thought he would reject if offered. He says, I envy you, Maximus. It's a good home worth fighting for. There is one more duty that I ask of you before you go home. Maximus rises quickly as a soldier does, stands at attention, says, what will you have me do, Caesar? He calls him Caesar and he doesn't get corrected this time. See, Marcus Aurelius knows who he is. And he knows what tools he has to use. And he knows when and where to use them. That's a wisdom we all have to strive to get, attain, and use. Marcus says, I want you to become the protector of Rome after I die. I will empower you to one end alone. Sorry about that. To give back power to the people of Rome and end the corruption that has crippled it. Of course, this is shocking and bewildering to Maximus, and he looks completely distraught with hearing that news and hearing that request. He doesn't say anything. And Marcus says, will you accept this great honor that I have offered? And Maximus says, like Gideon, with all my heart, no. And Marcus grabs his face, right in his hands. Face to face, yes. Face to face. See in me what I see in you. Every bit of Caesar that I am, you are. If you'll only see it. He says, Maximus, that's why it must be you. Maximus says, but surely there's a prefect, a senator, somebody who knows the city, who understands her politics. He jumps in, and Marcus says, but you have not been corrupted by her politics. What I see in you is the potential to get her out of corruption, to rescue the idea that was Rome, that's as fragile as a whisper. Others, these people you're talking about, they'll lose it. They won't hear it. There's too much noise. But you can talk. You can sit down. You can whisper. You can open your heart. And what I see is the next Caesar, the protector that makes the way for the republic again. And we get out of the hands of corrupt tyrants and we avoid these outcomes. And Maximus says, and Commodus, your son? Because he knows that's going to be a problem. Marcus says, Commodus is not a moral man. You have known this since you were young. Commodus cannot rule. He must not rule. This is where it deviates from the history. You are the son that I should have had, which is probably a true statement. I'm sure throughout his lifetime, Marcus Aurelius saw different men and different ladies and thought to himself, I should have had one of those. That should be me. I should be getting to enjoy that. It's loss. But it's a decision to keep pressing forward despite the loss. It's a decision to keep looking for an alternative way for God to move despite the way that you thought God was going to move for you. I thought this was going to be the way it would go. I thought this was how it's going to look. It looks absolutely nothing like that. And I can sit there in the mully grubs and in despair, waste away, become a tyrant, and be Caesarified and just dye myself purple in this position. But he chooses not to. He chooses to press forward. He chooses to find a better way. He says, Commodus knows that you command the loyalty of the army. And Maximus says, I need some time, sire. Marcus says, yes, by sunset, I hope you will have agreed. Now embrace me as my son and bring an old man another blanket. Psalm 37:11 reads, but the meek shall inherit the earth and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace. 4 years of peace in 20. Naming a man's successor that will usher in peace. Only being called Caesar and acting as Caesar when he needed to and when the time was right. Marcus Aurelius displays all of the characteristics of what being meek really is. The meek represent those trained and made competent with weapons of war, but keep them sheathed because they have come to a place where the competency of cultivating life overwhelms their power to take it. They've become warriors in a garden. They've accomplished what was set in motion by the whisper that led to the awakening of consciousness. They're prepared to manifest the kingdom of heaven here on earth, at which time, as is said, my wonderful brother, little Brent over here, has talked about this before, and it just fit in perfectly with this message. As in Micah 4:3 and Isaiah 2:4, it reads, "And he shall judge among many people and rebuke strong nations afar off, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." Now, learn comes from the word didomai. That didomai means to teach. So as we said in the beginning, you're called to an adventure, but you're going to learn war along the way. What you also have to learn is once you've learned war, when it's appropriate, when it's not. When those tools of warfare are appropriate and when they're not. When can you turn all your weapons of warfare that you've learned into tools of cultivation and allow the sword of the Lord to go before you? This ancient prophecy is a vision of a future where the beloved city, all of us as a functioning community and society, become the center of this world, the seat of theocracy, the burning nucleus of a reign of love and truth that manifests lasting peace. This ancient prophecy is, as the Gnostics would see it, our guiding star in the present storms. We've read about these competent warriors in a garden and their ability to take life, yet we see a choice to refrain from violence, to bring only a testimony of raising and tending to new life, growth, and progress. These warriors serve because they are wholly unconcerned with the material consequences of their actions. Why? Well, mess around and find out, as some would say. Once Marduk defeats Tiamat in the Enuma Elish, he moves from warfare to cultivation. I know that phrase is said a different way, but, stream. He constructs the heavenly order, fashions the year, defines the 12-sign zodiac, determines the movement of stars, planets, and the moon, and then creates man. This is all in the Enuma Elish creation myth. The warrior king, Marduk, who voluntarily faces the creative and destructive power that constitutes the very origin from where all things emerge, carves the unknown, unexplored territory represented by Tiamat, the dragon of chaos. He cuts her into pieces and into distinguishable elements to extract. And understands one's purpose from the vast unknown. He begins to cut her into pieces and make the world with her. And set into motion the understanding of how all things work. And lay that out for the generations to come. And prepare all of these things for man. It is a mirror image or an echo of what we read in Genesis. It's God who has conquered chaos, who's extracted light from the dark. With his magic words, fiery sword is represented by Marduk. That comes out of his mouth as a magic spell. And prepares a place for human beings to live and exist. It's very close to what we believe. You can see the imagery and the symbolism that they share. And it stands to reason, again, like I said Wednesday, much of this was written during their Babylonian captivity and confinement, where all of this material would have been available and all of these symbols and symbolism would have been present. So was God working even before they got there? Kind of sounds like it. Kind of sounds like they saw God in what they were in. See, no matter what circumstance you're in, if your bed is made in hell, God is with you. While they're in Babylonian captivity as slaves, God is showing them the creation myths and stories and imagery and symbols that they can use to help their own people understand more about who God is. Because God visited those people, and they visited those people. Because God visits all people. The moment we understand that and realize it doesn't matter what region of the world you were from, or what time of the world you were in, or what religious context He visited you in, God visited you. It's time we accept that. In Marduk's, diverse manners, perfect, great word. In Marduk's ancient Egyptian adaptation, he is depicted as Namtalaka, or Namtalaku, the God who restores life, who can restore all ruined gods as though they were His own creation, or the Lord who by holy invocation restores dead gods to life. Can I read that again? What He represents, what He becomes, and tell me if it doesn't sound like they're talking about Jesus Christ to you. Okay? He is depicted as the God who restores to life, the God who can restore all ruined gods as though they were His own creation. The Lord, who by holy invocation restores dead gods to life. So even if you leave this world in an untimely fashion, having not made things right, and you die as a God, we serve one who restores all dead gods to life. If only you would ask. If only you would have the faith of Jonah to be in hell and realize I don't have to stay here if I don't want to. I can get out of here, and I know the guy that gets me out of here. And in fact, He's so close to me, I can hear Him whisper to me right now. And I'm going to Nineveh, and I'm going to do something with it. It's important. As Namshub, Marduk was the bright God who brightens the way, orders our steps. Let there be light. He was given over 50 names by the Mesopotamians, all central to the creation of rich abundance, mercy, and justice. This was all seen as a move towards monotheism by this people in the Enuma Elish. So they were condensing their ideas of God into there's one Creator. There's one above all others. Sounds familiar? I'm going to keep ringing that bell as many times as I can. So much so that this idea of God, becomes the litmus test for their kings. Power was not what was desired. Competence was demanded because there was so much more than winning a battle or a war that was being sought by these people. I wish our country would get in a place like that today. We're so worried about wars and battles and winning. Competence is what we should be after. We don't competently take care of our own people here. We don't competently take care of our own roads, streets, public highways. Our justice system needs to continue growing and getting better. Our law enforcement system needs to keep growing and getting better. Our mental health systems need to keep growing and getting better. Our education system needs to burn down to the ground. Start over. Raise individuals, not slaves and employees. People to run businesses, to really take advantage of the capitalism that is afforded by the freedoms of this country instead of just being a cog plugged into someone else's capitalistic gain scheme. And I'm not against capitalism or making money or being profitable or being successful. But could we do a better job for the rest of our people here at home and get out of needless wars and violence and stop lining the pockets of corrupt politicians and institute returning our country back to a republic and its people? Absolutely. I'm off my political soapbox. Sorry. It's the meek that can destroy, but choose to create. They choose to be merciful. They choose to be just. They choose to be temperate. They choose to have wisdom. They choose courage not to pull their weapon and handle things a different way. They choose to cultivate life. This was the purpose of Jesus, who came as the manifestation of the Word, the Logos, to remind us all of who we were and who we've been. and who we can become and what great potentials we possess. Now, surely there's an example somewhere in our Bibles of where this potential Jesus demonstrated is clearly depicted in the lives of those who came after him, right? There's got to be some examples. I'm going to give you a couple. Let's go to Revelation chapter 11. We'll start in verse 3. And it reads, "And I will give power." Now, the word power is added by the writers or the copyists. You'll see it in italics if you're carrying a King James Version Bible, or you're on your Strong's or eSword or whatever application that you use. But if you look at the word give, like I said earlier, it comes from the word didomai in the Greek. Now, didomai in the Greek, as a verb, has to give. And it is emphasized by its connecting word. Now, the first word given as a connecting word in the definition of didomai, any guesses? Adventure. So if we read it this way, instead of power, let's read it the way the word didomai gives us. "And I will give adventure unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy or make known the thoughts of God for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth." Now I'm going to nerd out a little bit. 1,260 days equals approximately 42 months, which is approximately 3.5 years, which is a mirror image of Jesus' ministry from baptism to resurrection and ascension. Now many times, I know, that was fun, right? See, we make calculations too, and that brought me joy. See how that works? Thanks, James. Curtis. Now, many times these witnesses are taught as being Moses and Elijah. And most scholars make this connection through Luke 24, 26, and 27. And of course, they use the Mount of Transfiguration where they do appear. However, when they appear at the Mount of Transfiguration, they vanish. This is not what Revelation is talking about. They've come, they've appeared, they have vanished, or Christ has absorbed them into Himself to demonstrate all that they have, all of the good that they did is present in me now and is present in you too. We don't need those men to accomplish the things that they accomplished with God. We need you to understand you can do the same and more. The same way Jesus vanishes for us to use the keys He took, to walk through the doors of death, hell, and the grave into our co-seated life, heaven, and resurrection. It's necessary that these men vanish so that we would step up, so that we would fill those shoes and put on the new shoes that have for us to wear and walk the new paths and the new ways that God has for us. I believe that this is the pool of beings, divine beings, these witnesses are pulled from. The manifestation of sons and daughters of God. Us. That's the pool. That's who they're talking about. These two witnesses come from us, from our group, from our community, from believers. Those walking not in the power of man, anthropos, but in the adventure of attaining the competency of their divinity as gods. The children of God are the two witnesses. It's us. Meditations from Marcus Aurelius in Book 2 and verse in part 12. I'll read it for you. And we're talking about intelligence here. When they use the word intelligence, it's from nous, which means the mind. And to the Stoic, the mind is the highest and most rational part of the soul. So that's what he's referring to in his writing. It reads, "How quickly all things disappear, but the things themselves in the universe, and in time, even their memory." Both the things themselves in the universe, and in time, even their memory. "As for things we perceive through the senses, which entice us with physical pleasure, or terrify us with pain, or make us famous through rumor, how worthless, contemptible, filthy, short-lived, or indeed already dead they are. Intelligence alone, the mind of the soul, the highest and most rational part of your being, can understand this, as well as what kind of people they truly are whose opinions and voices make reputations. Also, if one sees death for what it is, and with the power of their the power of their mind strips away all its imaginary characteristics, one will then understand death to be nothing more than a natural process, and it is childish to be afraid of a natural process. Moreover, it is not only a natural process, but it is for the well-being of nature herself. Because life goes on. It continues throughout the generations. It will be necessary for me to no longer be up here and doing this at some point. Because someone else will need to take my place and take what I've said to the next step, into the next era, to the next generation, in the next vernacular and understanding. Revelation 4:11-4 reads, "These are the two olive trees, the two lampstands standing before the God of the earth." In Zechariah chapter 4, verse 2, it reads, "Then I said unto him, What are these two olive trees on the right and the left of the lampstand?" Verse 14 reads, "Then he said, These are the two anointed ones who stand by the Lord of the whole earth." Lampstand symbolizing the prophetic light, whispering of magic words, the Logos, the divine enchantment, the almond blossoms, the awakened tree, that he is awake over his word to perform it. These are not two olive trees of any cultural descent. In Romans 11, Paul is speaking to the division between Gentile and Jew and concludes with inclusion of all, having no degrees of separation. In fact, Paul states in verse 15 that the realization of other nations about their inclusion in Christ may have come at the expense of the Jews, but their turn to embrace these same Jews would raise them from their dead place of being. Because Christ, God, is the one who restores ruined gods or dead gods back to life. Let's pick up the reading in verse 16, and I'll read this in the mirror. Romans 11, verse 16. "The seeds set the pace. It sanctifies what sprouts from it. Seed produces after its own kind. If the invisible root is holy, so are the visible branches. And if some of the original branches were broken off, and you, Gentiles, like a wild olive, were grafted," meaning pricked in, put into place, from ketron, meaning goaded into by the divine impulse, when you break the word down, you were grafted in to partake of the same nourishing fatness of those roots. Then there is no cause for boasting against the ignorance of the Jews, because you are no suddenly better off than them. Remember, the roots sustain the branches and not the other way around. There is no point in thinking that in order to accommodate you, God had to first break off Jewish branches. But we hear stuff like that talked about and preached all the time. Stop it. Quit saying it. Quit doing it. God had a plan and has a plan for each and every one of His branches. Whether you're grafted in or born in, however you want to see it. We go back to Genesis. Who's a Jew back then? Who's a Gentile back then? Weren't none. Sorry, that's my South Gastonia coming out. There weren't none. That was bad, wasn't it? I even put a little southern accent on that. Yeah. Weren't none. We'll go talk about it later back in the holler. Around yonder with the chitlins. Verse 20, sorry, off the rails. "Their unbelief was their loss. Your faith is your gain." But it's verse 24 and 25 that really gets us where we need to be today. And it reads like this: "You were cut out of the unfruitful olive tree and grafted into the stock of the original tree. How much more will these natural branches be grafted again into their own identity? Do not be ignorant then of the mysterion, of their temporal exclusion. Their blindness opened your eyes to the fullness of God's plan for the entire world." See, it seems here that Paul has tapped into a greater understanding of the mystery of how God operates and how we respond to His operation. Temptation and tests, as we talked about on Wednesday, not to produce failures or cut people off or exclude people, but the temptations and tests are to produce successes and graft all back in. For more on that, read 1 Corinthians 2, verses 1 through 16. Here's some homework. Welcome to the new year. You can also hear another echo of the genius of God hiding the treasure of the gospel from physical or material view in Matthew 13, verse 44, where there's a man who finds treasure in a field. And once he finds it, he hides it again. And then he sells all that he has to purchase the entire field. What I would like to posit for you today to think about, and for us to talk about in the comments or the stream, or maybe a panel one night, is that this man who discovered this treasure is the actual original owner of that field.
Yes. The merchant. Yes. Yes. Yes.
And he sold all he had.
Yes.
Just for that field.
On the cross. Yes. Buy it. Yes.
To buy it.
Yes.
He ransomed us all because we are treasure hidden in earthen vessels.
Right.
And only our Creator would know the value
Amen.
of what's been discovered.
Amen.
So He purchases the field. Why? So the field can understand the value that's hidden within it.
Right.
Because without Him, it's just dirt.
Right.
And it's treasure that nobody knows about. But now, it can be cultivated.
Yes.
Now, it can come forth and be seen by the world. Now, the treasure can be the highlight, not the field.
Amen.
Psalm 24, verse 1, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. The mystery hidden for ages and generations is unveiled, and Christ would ransom us from our own ignorance and the lies we believe about who we really are. He gave all to buy our clay and dirt, to show us all that we belong to Him. The field, us, is all He has. The whole of the gospel of Jesus Christ is to remind us of our original redeemed value. Back to Revelation 11, verse 5. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth and devoureth their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. These have power, which is from the word exousia, meaning a privilege. So these have a privilege that's subjectively represented as force, capacity, competency, or freedom. So they have the privilege of freedom and competency. Subjectively, objectively, they have the privilege of mastery. They've mastered their weapons of warfare. They've mastered their tools of cultivation. They have the privilege of freedom to be competent, to be who they are, to use force if necessary. They have this privilege to shut heaven, that it not rain in the days of their prophecy, and have the power over waters to turn them into blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them. These witnesses, I contend, are not Moses and Elijah, but individuals like us who have become the competent and meek of the earth. As such, their story does not end with the material consequence of death from giving their testimony and keeping their weapons sheathed. No, they would not stay dead. Like Jesus, they would be raised up and ascend in a cloud, demonstrating the entire prophetic word, which we know is manifest in the person of Jesus Christ, now fully, freely, and completely includes us in a co-resurrection and His co-ascension. And I pray that we all find our identity, competency in God to become the meek warriors tending His gardens, so that we can once again call this place heaven.
Yes.
A heaven that we are designed to manifest, adventure into, and cultivate. That's how we become warriors in gardens. That's how we win the lost. That's how we live as God's. If you repeat after me, I love Him. Because He first loved me. Thank you, and God bless you. We'll see you again on Wednesday. Oh, actually, we'll see you. We're going to do a recording tonight. Almost slipped my mind. We have Reverend Burrows in from Faith Temple out of Taylor, South Carolina. He's coming in to teach tonight and deliver the word of truth for our New Year's service. We're going to be having some snacks, treats, pickups around 6 o'clock. The service will be kicking off around 7. We're going to make sure that we start the new year right and we get it on the right foot. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Please make some friends in the comment section or have productive debates. Let's get to know more about each other and let's get to know more about our Creator. Don't forget to download Subsplash, subscribe to the app. That gives you access to our stream on all viewing platforms, from Apple TV to YouTube to other platforms that may be available on your smartphone, your smart TV, or your tablet. We appreciate all of your engagement in giving us the opportunity to bring these words of spirit, truth, and life into your homes when you can't be here physically. But of course, we would love to have you in person. We'll see you tonight at 7 o'clock. Thank you, and God bless you.